The worst mortar on this list got pulled from service by its own army before the war was over. The best one was so good the enemy copied it exactly and issued it as their own. Every number here, caliber, weight, range, comes from verified ordnance records, not a tier list somebody eyeballed. 29 mortars, worst to best, starting at the bottom right now. We start at the bottom with a weapon that solved a problem nobody needed solved this way. The Type 11 used a muzzle-loaded smoothbore tube, but instead of a simple propellant charge behind the shell, range was adjusted through a ring of small chambers on the exterior of the barrel that the crew had to load and fire individually. It entered service in 1922, fired a 70mm shell weighing around 3 kilograms, and topped out under 2,000 meters. Japanese infantry found it too slow and too fiddly to operate under fire, and it was quietly pulled from frontline units well before the war most people remember even started. Next, we have the weapon that existed only to be replaced. The Type 10 was a simple 50mm tube adopted in 1921, designed to launch the standard infantry hand grenade a bit farther than a soldier's arm could manage. Effective range sat around 175 meters, which was already modest for its era. It was superseded within a decade by the Type 89, and today it survives mostly as a footnote explaining what came before the weapon everyone actually remembers. Moving on to a German design that the Germans themselves gave up on. Adopted in 1936, the Leichter Granatwerfer 36 was a 50mm platoon mortar with a fixed elevation and a gas bleed screw on the barrel that controlled range instead of a variable charge. Weighing about 14 kilograms with a 3-man crew, and fired a small 900-gram bomb out to 520 meters at best. The Wehrmacht concluded it simply did not deliver enough explosive payload to justify the weight, and withdrew it from frontline service by 1941, replacing its role with heavier 8cm mortars. We have the Soviet equivalent of the same lesson learned twice. The 50mm mortars produced as the RM-38, RM-40, and RM-41 were simple drop-fired tubes weighing around 12 kilograms with a 2 to 3-man crew and an effective range near 800 meters. They were cheap, they were everywhere, and the Red Army itself decided by 1943 that the round was too weak to matter, redirecting manufacturing capacity toward the 82mm mortar instead. When the people who designed and issued a weapon abandon it mid-war, that is not a rumor, that is a verdict. Let us continue with a weapon that tried to be clever and paid for it. The Brixia Modello 35 used a lever-actuated loading mechanism and a spring-loaded ram instead of a simple drop-fire system, paired with 45mm ammunition that used variable propellant rings for range adjustment. It weighed roughly 15.5 kilograms and could reach 536 meters on paper. In practice, Italian infantry regarded it as inaccurate and overcomplicated for what it delivered, and it stands as one of the more disliked light mortars fielded by any major army in the war. Next, we have Japan's attempt to fix the Type 10's problems. Adopted in 1938, the Type 98 simplified the loading system into a straightforward drop-fire tube with a lighter overall build, extending effective range to around 700 meters. It was a genuine improvement. It still could not escape the core limitation of the 50mm class, which is that no amount of engineering makes a small warhead into a big one, and Japanese doctrine kept leaning on knee mortars for close support.
Moving on to a weapon whose entire virtue was staying out of the way. Adopted in 1938, the 2-inch mortar was a simple muzzle-loaded tube that a single soldier could brace against the ground and fire, throwing a roughly 1-kilogram high-explosive bomb out to around 460 meters, with smoke and illumination rounds also standard issue. It was not powerful, and it was not meant to be. It served at platoon level for the entire war and stayed in British service for decades afterward, which is a better track record than most weapons on this list can claim. We have a mortar whose real legacy belongs to a country other than the one that built it. The Brandt 60mm MLE 1935 weighed about 19.7 kilograms, threw a 1.33 kilogram bomb out past 1,000 meters, and used an adjustable bipod for range control. Its design became the direct basis for the American 60mm M2 that would go on to fight across every Allied theater. France's collapse in 1940 meant French troops barely got to use their own invention before its influence moved on without them. Let us continue with a mortar built entirely around one compromise. The Kurzer Granatwerfer 42 shortened the standard 8-centimeter tube for mountain and airborne troops, cutting weight from around 57 kilograms to about 26. Range dropped accordingly, down from roughly 2,400 meters to close to 1,000. It was exactly what it needed to be for the units that carried it up mountains and jumped with it out of aircraft, and nothing more than that. Next, we have a genuinely unusual piece of engineering, where nearly every mortar on this list is a smooth bore firing a fin-stabilized bomb. The Type 94 90mm used a rifled barrel firing a spin-stabilized shell with a pre-engraved rotating band, adopted in 1934. It weighed around 158 kilograms and reached roughly 1,400 meters, with noticeably better accuracy than smoothbore rivals of similar size. The rifling and the precision ammunition it required also made it heavier and more expensive to produce, which is likely why it never displaced simpler designs in Japanese service. Moving on to Japan's answer to heavy trench warfare, built on lessons borrowed from French Brandt heavy mortar designs. The Type 97 150mm mortar threw a high-explosive bomb in the range of 25 to 30 kilograms out past 2,000 meters, with an overall weight well past 180 kilograms. That kind of punch made it a serious asset in fixed defensive positions. It made it a poor fit for mobile jungle warfare that defined most of Japan's later Pacific campaigns, which is why relatively few saw action. We have the refined version of a German smoke and chemical mortar concept. The Nebelwerfer 40 was a rifled 10-centimeter mortar firing a spin-stabilized shell, improving on its predecessor with range out past 3,000 meters and options for both high-explosive and smoke payloads. Dedicated German smoke troops relied on it for screening barrages ahead of infantry assaults. It shares its name, confusingly, with the far more famous multi-barrel rocket launcher of the same war, which is a separate weapon entirely and constantly gets mixed up with this one.
Let us continue with another French-derived Japanese design, this time built on the Brandt 120mm concept. Weighing around 180 kilograms, it delivered real regimental-level firepower where it was actually deployed. The problem was scale. Production numbers stayed low, and most Japanese formations continued to rely on conventional artillery instead, leaving this one a capable weapon that too few units ever got their hands on. Next, we have a straightforward weight reduction exercise. The Type 99 stripped down the earlier Type 97 81mm design specifically for jungle mobility, trading some range for a lighter overall package infantry could actually carry through dense terrain. It became a standard medium mortar for Japanese infantry in the later years of the Pacific War. It was not a leap forward in capability, just a sensible adjustment to the terrain Japan was actually fighting in by that point. Moving on to the design that came before the entry we already covered 2 spots back. Adopted in 1934, the Nebelwerfer 35 was the first rifled 10-centimeter smoke mortar in German service, establishing the concept that the Nebelwerfer 40 would later refine. It did the job it was built for. It simply got replaced once German ordnance figured out how to do the same job with better range, which is the normal fate of a first-generation design. We have the unglamorous backbone of British and Commonwealth infantry support. Weighing about 57 kilograms, the 3-inch mortar started the war with an effective range around 1,460 meters and, after wartime modifications in 1942, pushed that out past 2,500 meters, firing a 4.5-kilogram high-explosive bomb. Nobody wrote songs about it. Every Commonwealth infantry company from North Africa to Normandy to Burma had one, and it worked every time it was asked to. Let us continue with Japan's primary medium mortar from 1937 onward. It weighed around 52 kilograms, fired a 3.2-kilogram high-explosive bomb, and reached roughly 2,850 meters. It was solid, dependable, and well-suited to the moderate weight requirements of Pacific Island fighting.
It is also proof that Japan could build a perfectly competent conventional mortar when it was not busy engineering novelty into smaller calibers. Next, we have a case study in knowing when to buy rather than build. The M1 was an American license-built version of the French Brandt MLE 1927/31, weighing around 61 kilograms in firing configuration and reaching past 3,000 meters with the right ammunition. It became the standard American infantry battalion in every theater of the war. The United States did not reinvent this weapon. It recognized a good French design and adopted it wholesale, which turned out to be the smarter move. We have proof that Italian equipment does not deserve its blanket reputation across the board. The 81/14 designation refers to a barrel length of 14 calibers, and this medium mortar weighed around 63 kilograms while reaching out past 4,000 meters with later ammunition, a genuinely long range for its class. It is consistently rated by historians as one of the better infantry weapons Italy fielded in the entire war. It rarely gets the credit for that, mostly because it shares a flag with equipment that did not perform nearly as well.
Moving on to the most quietly influential mortar of the entire war. Adopted in 1927 and refined in 1931, the Brandt 81mm weighed about 60 kilograms and reached roughly 2,850 meters with its standard round. Nearly every major army's medium mortar, American, Soviet, and beyond, traces its lineage directly or indirectly back to this design. It never fired a shot in French hands worth remembering. Its blueprint fought on every front of the war regardless. Let us continue with a mountain weapon that outgrew its original job. The M1938 was designed as a pack mortar for mountain and later general infantry use. Weighing around 170 kilograms and reaching past 6,000 meters, a genuinely long range for a weapon light enough to break down for animal transport, its combination of range and punch made it valued heavy support well beyond the mountain divisions it was originally built for, particularly on rougher fronts like the Caucasus. We have a weapon that started life as something else entirely. Originally built as a chemical and smoke projector, the 4.2-inch mortar was urgently repurposed for high explosive fire once the British Army needed heavier support than the 3-inch could provide. Its rifled bore threw a bomb around 9 kilograms out to roughly 4,000 meters, controlled at brigade level rather than issued down to companies. It ended the war respected as a near substitute for light artillery, which is an unusual career path for something that began as a smoke shell delivery system. Next, we have the weapon of the opening of this video, and it earns its place here on merit, not just infamy. Weighing under 5 kilograms, the Type 89 could fire either a dedicated 50mm mortar bomb out to around 670 meters or the standard infantry hand grenade for shorter ranges, giving a single squad-level weapon two distinct roles. It was standard issue down to the platoon level across the Japanese army for the entire war. The knee-breaking myth aside, it was one of the most widely used and genuinely effective close support weapons any infantry force fielded in this conflict. Moving on to America's version of the same repurposed chemical weapon story. Originally a chemical warfare service mortar, the M2 was adapted for high explosive use, weighing around 136 kilograms in firing position and reaching past 3,200 meters, with later ammunition improvements pushing that further, firing a bomb close to 9.5 kilograms. Troops nicknamed it the Four Deuce, and it earned a reputation for accuracy and punch that made infantry commanders treat it as functional light artillery. Few mortars on this list crossed as cleanly from smoke weapon to feared fire support asset. We have the mortar that German infantry doctrine was quite literally built around. Weighing about 57 kilograms, the Granatwerfer 34 fired a 3.5 kilogram bomb out to around 2,400 meters, and a well-drilled crew could sustain 15 to 25 rounds a minute with real precision. Allied infantry across multiple theaters singled it out specifically for how accurate German mortar teams were with this weapon. Many veterans on both sides of the war have called it the best medium mortar design of the entire conflict, and the accuracy record backs that up. Let us continue with the mortar that never left an American rifle company's side. Built on the French Brandt 60mm design, the M2 weighed around 19 kilograms, could hit targets as close as 91 meters or as far as 1,815 meters, and threw a bomb of roughly 1.36 kilograms. That range spread from nearly point blank to over a mile made it genuinely versatile at the company level. It served through this war and stayed in American service for decades after it, which says everything about how well the design held up. We have a mortar family with a caliber choice that was not an accident. The 82mm round is deliberately larger than the standard 81mm used by Germany and its allies, which meant Soviet mortars could fire captured German bombs while German mortars could never fire Soviet ones. Wartime simplification cut the weapon's weight from around 68 kilograms in the BM-37 down to about 52 in the PM-43, while range held steady around 3,040 meters. That single-caliber decision handed the Red Army a logistics advantage every time it overran a German position, which is the kind of detail that never shows up in a spec sheet but mattered constantly in the field.
Next, we have an admission of defeat disguised as a procurement decision. After encountering the Soviet 120mm mortar in 1941, German ordnance officers did not attempt to out-design it. They copied it directly, producing the Granatwerfer 42 as a near reproduction of the captured Soviet weapon, weighing around 285 kilograms and reaching past 6,000 meters with a bomb close to 15.5 kilograms. Issued at regimental level, it gave German infantry the heavy mortar punch they had been missing. It is a rare case of a major army looking at enemy equipment and simply conceding the enemy had already solved the problem better. We arrive at the mortar the Germans respected enough to steal outright. Adopted in 1938 and simplified into the wheeled PM-43 by 1943, this regimental mortar dropped in weight from around 275 kilograms to roughly 205, while reaching out past 6,000 meters, some variants pushing past 7,000, with a high explosive bomb close to 16 kilograms. That is firepower approaching light artillery from a weapon light enough for an infantry regiment to control on its own without waiting on divisional guns. Simple to build, brutal in effect, and respected enough by the enemy that they reverse-engineered it rather than compete with it. This is, by consensus among historians and the ordnance officers of the era who actually had to face it, the best mortar design to come out of World War II. That is every major mortar of World War II, ranked from the ones armies quietly abandoned to the one the enemy copied outright. If you think a design belongs higher or lower, say so in the comments, and subscribe for the next full breakdown.